As we come to a close on the summer garden, we're transitioning to fall. Here are a few things that I've learned this year in my garden. Something that I have learned this year is invest in perennial herbs. I planted a very small $3 start of oregano 6 years ago, and now it is a massive plot, and I can harvest more than enough of oregano from that one plant for our whole year. Plus, I keep giving starts away. I pull up some and give them to my friends. So invest into the perennial herbs, which would be like oregano, thyme, rosemary. I know I'm missing a few in there. But the perennial herbs, plant them now. You will get your money's worth out of them and so much more. We gotta move the elephant here. This is my oregano plot. So this was one small little start that I planted 6 years ago, and you can see it's completely spread all in this section here. I just chopped a whole bunch of it off today to dry for the winter. But when I give it away, all I do is pull up a clump, place it in some dirt, and give it to a friend, and then that continues to grow for them.
Rachel, what are you eating?
My cantaloupe that I grew from my garden.
You grew that all by yourself?
Actually, I didn't try it. It just sort of showed up.
Nice.
Let's go over to the okra. Actually, we're gonna, okra. This okra right here is absolutely beautiful, and you can see it's thriving. It's been setting tons of pods for us. Let me show you what I learned with okra by showing you the other row of okra. Now look at this row here, and you can see how it goes shortest to tallest. And that is because this was a little bit shaded. I planted my zinnia row in front of my okra, thinking that the okra would grow faster than the zinnias, but the zinnias grew faster than the okra and shaded out the okra a little bit. So okra really needs full sun to thrive. This row of okra was planted way before that first row of okra I showed you. That first row of okra is in full sun all day long, and it is thriving. So okra needs full sun. Calendula, something I did different this year with calendula because I really love it, and every year I struggle a little bit to get enough for tea blends, to make salves, things like that. So this year I started my calendula starts inside and way before the first frost, and then I put them out in the garden 2 weeks before the first frost. I had so much calendula. This whole side of my path was completely full of calendula blooms. It was absolutely stunning. I took lots of pictures. We might have some B-roll to show you. But I harvested so much calendula from that. Then once the heat hit, I had another row of calendula that I planted, and that stuff did not thrive. It got blight really quick. You're getting distracted by a mosquito. So calendula seems to really like the cooler temperatures, and I will definitely be starting it inside again next year. Let's talk squash. Do you see this monster? Now it is starting to dwindle a little bit, but I experimented a little bit with squash this year because I've always struggled to grow squash. The vine borers have always gotten them, or squash bugs. I started my squash seeds inside 4 weeks before our last frost, and then planted out my starts into the garden, and they were pretty big starts. Well, this guy is still one of those original starts that I started inside 4 weeks before our last frost. I planted it out 2 weeks after our last frost, and it's still giving me squash. And you can see that there is a lot of vine borer damage on there. Like, there's evidence of a lot being in there, but it's still growing. I have harvested so much squash. We have a lot of squash in the freezer to make zucchini bread this winter, which has always been one of my goals. So this was a total win for me this year, and I'll be starting all my squash inside next year and saving seeds from this one. Peppers, usually at this time of year, we're mid-August, I am harvesting a lot of peppers, and this year it has been really slow. My plants look amazing. They've been really bushy, they've been really green. So my thought process is I always put chicken manure, like the chicken bedding, on my garden at the end of the season. So when everything gets ripped out, usually in September, I layer the chicken manure on, let it decompose until I plant in like April, May. I think that this area here was too concentrated with some of that, and it got a lot of nitrogen. When you have too much nitrogen in your soil, the symptoms of that are really beautiful plants and really bushy growth, but they produce very little fruit. So I'm hoping that these catch up a little bit. They're really starting to bud, and we should still get some peppers, but I think just too much nitrogen in this area, and I'm gonna watch out for that next year. Like, they're beautiful plants, and there's like some tiny little peppers, but there's not a lot of peppers. Let me show you an example. I have 2 banana peppers. One is planted in this row where I think there was too much nitrogen, and it has a couple peppers on it. You see some that are growing there. And then I have another banana pepper over here that I don't think has too much nitrogen, and I've been producing a lot of peppers off of this one. It's producing a lot, and there's lots of different growth, not so much leaves, but a lot of fruit. Green beans. So these are my pole beans behind me here, and I have bush beans, dragon tongue bush beans around the outer end there. I have found, I've been experimenting because that's how you learn in the garden, what varieties do we really like. I always grow Blue Lake bush beans because they've been my favorite. Mosquitoes. Always grow Blue Lake bush beans because they've been our favorite, but this year I want to try a couple different ones to kind of see, is there something else that I like or that I can add in. I tried dragon tongue bush beans this year, and honestly they were not my favorite. So they're a little bit of a longer bean. They get some purple veins in them, and they're really pretty, and they do have a good flavor, but personally I just don't like how they're like flat. I like a little bit more of a crunch in that way. And then back here is my Blue Lake pole beans, and this tastes just like the bush beans. It just grows up a trellis, and I really prefer these. I also tried to grow Gold Rush green beans, and these have a similar texture to the Blue Lake. I still prefer the Blue Lake bush beans over the other ones that I've tried. And while the pole beans are really pretty, I do prefer growing bush beans because bush beans produce all their fruit all at once, and I can freeze all of that right away. Where the pole beans are coming in continually, and we actually don't fresh eat them as much. I prefer to blanch them and freeze them for later on. So I would probably just stick with a big old row of bush beans because that's what I've learned I like. One thing that I grew this year that I probably won't ever grow again is a cherry spoon tomato. They're teeny, teeny, teeny tiny, but it has like completely taken over this corner, and the texture of them are not my favorite. They're really like I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like a hard little cherry tomato, but they just haven't been our favorite. So I don't want to give space to things that I don't like.
This year I learned a lot about spacing and what tomatoes I like and what tomatoes I don't. So over here I had the Texas Star tomato, which I really, really liked this year. I had it on a burger and it was delicious. The small one, the smaller tomatoes, they're called chocolate sprinkles. They're really hard and I don't really like the flavor of them, so I probably won't plant those again. It's a cherry tomato, but it's like this big. And they kind of look like they're moldy, but really they're just, that's the color of the tomato. Then over here is where I used to have my turnips, and I planted them too close to my tomatoes, and the turnips are sucking all the nutrients from my tomatoes. Tomatoes. When I pulled up the turnips, this tomato started getting huge. It used to be like really, really tiny, but it started to get bigger after I pulled out the turnips, and the turnips were beautiful. I'm probably going to plant turnips again. I really like the taste of them. I'd come down, I'd pull up a turnip, I'd go in the house and take the skin off because the skin's kind of hard, and then I just eat it raw like that.
And you like that?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Delicious. All these beautiful watermelons that I did not try to plant. I guess I didn't try to plant the turnips either. I thought they were radishes, and then I planted them, and just as I put like the last row down, Mom's like, wait, those are turnips! And I'm like, oh. I'm like, well, I guess I'll try it. And it was delicious. I love them way more than radishes.
You know what we call that?
What?
A happy accident.
A happy accident, like these. And they're everywhere.
Those are cantaloupes, not watermelon.
Oops, cantaloupe. I meant cantaloupe. And I think that's it.
I tried a new pole tomato this year called a San Marzano, and I have absolutely loved it. It has produced a ton of tomatoes and the flavor has been so good. Fresh eating and sauces, everything, they're a really bright red flavor. I packed a lot of them in my husband's lunch with a little bit of salt and pepper, and he loved them. And they are still producing. They're still climbing. They're still healthy. They're setting amazing fruit. So that is something that I will add to my list of things to grow every year. Every year the garden teaches me something new, and I'm sure if you've been gardening for a few years, you've learned that as well. If this is your first year gardening and you feel like you've had a lot of failures, do not get discouraged. You are learning something. The garden is a classroom, it is your teacher, so don't view it as failure, view it as something that you can learn for the next year. Let me know what you've learned this year. I would love to see that in the comments. The only thing that I would do different this year is I wish I had more space for potatoes, stuff like that.
We should just move.